Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir.
I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth. And today's case is a double header of SURGAR, starring Colin Farrell, and REBUS, starring Robert Rankin.
Before we kick off with the episode, just a quick reminder to everyone, if you're liking the show and you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure you're subscribing, make sure you're sharing, make sure you're liking and all that kind of stuff. It really helps us out. Leave us comments on Apple Podcasts and leave us ratings on Spotify. Those go a long way. Thank you to everyone who's already been doing that and leaving us super kind and positive reviews. It makes us super happy. So thank you for that. But yeah, make sure if you listen and you like us, keep reviewing, keep sharing with your friends. But anyway, let's get into the film. Here we go.
Luke, do you want to take SURGAR first?
Let's do SURGAR. SURGAR, bloody SURGAR. So for those who don't know, because I feel like we talked about SURGAR a long time ago, because it came out like I want to say like April or May of 2024. So it's relatively new, but it was episodic. So one episode per week. And it appealed to me because it's modern day LA. Colin Farrell's playing a private detective named John Sugar. And it's all about him trying to find this missing girl. It's very, very classic noir stuff. Big Hollywood family, dirty secrets, all that kind of, all the trappings that I love. Like, I remember when it came out, and I remember no one talking about it on my Twitter feed, and it worried me.
Right.
I was thinking, oh, maybe it's not good. Like, why is no one talking about it? Because Colin Farrell's a really big star. Apple have a lot of really good shows. And so that in and of itself sort of worried me. So I thought I'll hold off and catch up with it maybe a little bit later. So I ended up waiting for the whole thing to come out, and I binged it in a day. Not intentional. I didn't intend to binge it, but I put on episode 1 and I was instantly hooked and couldn't stop watching.
Well, like you, I'd not really seen anything about it. Certainly not seen any reviews since until I'd finished it. But that, as an opening episode of a TV series, that first one is an absolute cracker, isn't it?
It is.
I'm not surprised you went from episode 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and just carried on.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, we can just kind of talk. We're going to be all over the place with this. We're not going to be linear about the episode and things that happen. So, and also spoilers for both shows, SURGAR and REBUS. So just
absolutely.
If you've not watched them.
We should put a major spoiler alert on.
Yeah, because also the other thing that's really great about SURGAR is it's 8 episodes, and some of them are not long. They're like 30-ish minutes. So you're not even like, it's not even 8 full hours. Like it's well written, well paced, and well structured, that the episodes fit the time that they need to be perfectly. So some are an hour, some are a little bit less. It's tight and it doesn't feel flabby. We're like, I watch shows on Netflix. I'm like, this is an hour of TV wasted.
I agree. SURGAR's had the guts to say, well, no, we'll tell the portion of the story that we need to tell in episode 3. And if that takes 30 minutes, it takes 30 minutes. If it takes 40 minutes, it takes 40 minutes. If it takes the hour, it takes the hour. And that was really refreshing. That in terms of storytelling, pacing, it just did what it had to do, and then finished
from the very beginning. And we should talk about the beginning, the very first episode, because I love how it begins. It really plants you in a film noir world to the point where the opening is black and white.
Yeah,
and I love that. He's set in Tokyo. He's looking for a missing boy. He comes to this house, and this guy's like, basically like, oh, I'm looking for this kid. I know, essentially, I know you know where he is. Tell me, and if you don't tell me, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Which is. I
don't want to hurt you, he says, but I will.
I don't want to hurt you, but I will, and I love it, and because Colin's delivery from the very beginning is he's so calm. He's calm, but he's not cool. He's not suave in the way that Humphrey Bogart or Robert Mitchum or those kind of guys are calm and suave and tough. He's calm, but there's a sort of otherness to him, which we'll get into a bit later.
We'll get into that. But yeah, he has an expression which is that he looks faintly worried, almost,
Yes.
a bit uneasy.
Yes.
And it's not it's not a natural expression. It's not how he looks really, but he's obviously putting it on for reasons that we'll perhaps come on to later. But you're right, he isn't the self-assured private eye that Robert Mitchum is, and that Humphrey Bogart is, or even that Dick Powell is in Murder My Sweet.
Oh yeah.
This isn't Sam Spade by any
No.
stretch of the imagination. This is somebody who knows what he's got to do, but knows that it might be at physical or some other type of cost to himself.
Yes.
And it's carried through just by that performance. It's very, very good.
Yeah, and because I remember being quite, I was captivated by his performance, because I just kept thinking there's something just so like slightly odd about you. Like it was engaging and different. And I think we're always sort of. It's always hit and miss when you come across a new crime show or a book or a film, and you're looking for that slight edge that kind of differentiates this new detective from all the others. And a lot of times it's kind of, oh, this is very typical. I mean, you pick up any DCI book on the shelf at Waterstones or Barnes and Noble, and a lot of the times it's just sort of very, very run of the mill. But every once in a while you hit that thing where you're like, he was fantastic in this. And I also loved that. I mean, you notice it right away once that opening scene ends and he rescues the boy and leaves. There's this wonderful transition from black and white to color.
I had an instant bolt of surprise at that, because I went into this not really knowing too much about it, purposefully.
Yeah.
This is something new. I don't want to read around it before I go in. I'm going to go in.
Yes.
As a sort of virgin viewer, as it were.
Yes.
And when it starts in black and white, and it is very noirish in those opening scenes, it's heavily noir. And he's in a very plain black suit and black tie, necktie, not dinner suit. And I thought, oh, this is going to be set in period. This is, I'm looking forward to this. Black and white, noirish, in period, because there was nothing to say that it wasn't. Until it goes to colour. And then I thought, oh, okay, but we're still in period, aren't we? And then it becomes very clear that you're not.
Yes.
And that was just one of many narrative surprises.
Yes.
and I think sort of filmic technique surprises that makes you think, oh, okay, we're playing around here. We're playing with some cliches, for want of a better word, and we're playing with some techniques, and then we're gonna do something different. This is good. Okay, we're in now, right? I'm with you. I get what wavelength we're on, but it was nice to be that surprised by something.
Yeah, because one of the things I really enjoyed, especially in those opening scenes in Tokyo, and this is a theme that goes throughout the whole show, is they begin to intersplice old footage in and around things. So in the Tokyo scene, when he's talking about Tokyo and loving Tokyo and watching all the people and all that kind of stuff, they show footage that's like Tokyo from like the 60s and 70s, and so it is a sort of like, you're like, wait a minute, that's really old, and you're trying to sort of, you're a little bit disoriented but fascinated. You're like, what's going on? But it doesn't pull you out, but it pulls you in. You're fascinated by what's going on. And essentially what you realize or learn very quickly about Sugar is he has an affinity for old movies, particularly film noir. He's a movie buff in general, and he loves the old Hollywood stuff. He is at the period where things like The Big Sleep were coming out, and Double Indemnity and all that kind of stuff, which they actually show scenes of movies and throughout the
Sunset
show.
Boulevard. They show a scene from Sunset Boulevard.
Yes,
with William Holden in a swimming pool, and that transitions. That cuts to Sugar in a swimming pool, and it's very well done. It's that link between fact and fiction, for want of a better, ways that he's obsessed with all this stuff.
Yes, it's very meta. It's very meta in that what is happening on screen is then, or what is happening in Sugar's story is then sort of flashed and replicated via older film noir movies. Like it's almost like we're kind of getting glimpses of in his head. He's living out a film noir fantasy almost.
Yeah,
like there's the scene where he's breaking into an apartment building because he's trying to get to Melanie who is inside and being held captive. I think it's like episode 3 or 4, I can't remember. But as he's trying to break into the building, they're flashing back between I can't remember the film, but flashing back to another film where the detective is trying to break into a building as well. It's kind of bouncing back and forth between that. And to me, I think that it's self-referential, but it's done in a I would say like a interesting and classy way that it doesn't feel like it's beating you over the head.
No, and it avoids being self-indulgent because of that. Because it could so easily have fallen into self-indulgence. And there's another scene where he's interviewing some students who were friends with the girl who's gone missing, Olivia.
Olivia Seagan.
And while he's interrogating them, I can't remember what film it is, but it's a Humphrey Bogart film where he is also questioning somebody.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
and it's done in such a way that when Bogart comes in, he's asking the question that Sugar would have asked.
Yes.
So the conversation flows brilliant. The conversation flows perfectly naturally.
Yeah.
As an interrogation scene.
Yeah.
But it jumps between Sugar and the girls and Bogart and his suspect. And it's so well done. So the conversation goes something like, have you seen her recently? Says Sugar. The girl says no. Then Bogart says, you wouldn't be lying to me, would you, honey?
Yeah.
And then it cuts back to the girl and she says, no, I'm telling you the truth. It's so well done.
Yes.
But you're right. It's as if he's having these conversations in real life, in inverted commas, but playing them out in his head with reference to films that he's seen and devoured.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's nowhere near as jarring as my description makes it sound.
I think you described it quite well. I think that's it's very clear, and I just love how the show does that throughout the whole way. He's taken so much inspiration. His job, he's so inspired by the way these guys acted in these old movies, and he puts that forward, and I love that.
Yeah, he's absorbed so much from these films. That's the way he acts in real life. I think that's
Now, interestingly, this show was created by Mark Protosevich. I hope I pronounced your name right, Mark. If I didn't, I'm sorry. So he's a screenwriter with a couple of interesting titles. So The Cell from 2000, which I never saw. I Am Legend from 2007 with Will Smith. And Thor. He's a writer on all these movies. And also Old Boy in 2013, which is a neo-noir movie with Josh Brolin, which is on our list. One day we might cover it. So I got to be honest, I don't love his CV.
No. And he also did a remake of The Poseidon Adventure, which is one of my favorite childhood films, and I don't love him for that either.
Yes. So it's interesting that this clearly is where he shines. Like, I've not seen Old Boy, so I can't speak to that. I Am Legend was fun enough. I remember having fun with I Am Legend. But like Thor, coincidentally, we're sort of doing a mild rewatch of the original Marvel movies. And we just started Thor last night, and my God, that movie is terrible. My God. I'm not going to go into it, but just it's like the first 20-30 minutes is nothing but exposition, and it is just so boring. Anyway, but interestingly, Mark was also signed on to do a sequel to Batman and Robin. He was going to do a movie called Batman Unchained, and it was going to feature a Scarecrow and like a hallucination of the Joker. And was going to be a sequel to Batman and Robin, which is just nuts, absolutely nuts.
And just in case you think that film couldn't get any more nuts, I think I'm right in saying that the Scarecrow is going to be Nicolas Cage.
He was initially approached to do it, but then turned it down, but they were going to have Coolio do it, and I think Coolio I think he's in Batman and Robin. I think he's in because they
Oh, yeah,
wanted
he's
him.
in Batman and Robin.
Yeah, they wanted him to cameo. They wanted Nick Cage to cameo in Batman and Robin and set it up. But ultimately, this movie never happened. But I'm just like, what interesting CV. Not what I expected. I should say he's only credited as doing the story for Thor. So that things probably changed. But anyway, I just found it interesting because to me it goes to show that it's like, sometimes we're hypercritical of the writing, but then you also got to think like how much of the bad writing is the writer and how much is the bad writing from the studio. And for example, Marvel is famous for just butchering their stories because producers think they're the writers and producers think they're the directors. And I feel like with Sugar, whatever was going on with this, like everything was clicking. They were just able to do what they wanted to do, and they did it really damn well.
It's so fluid. It is tempting to say that they shot what was written for once, and it is a complex story. It's as all good noir is. It's twisty and it's turny, and there's dead ends and all the rest of it, and lot of wheels moving in at once. But it's very well plotted, and
structure is phenomenal
there. And I don't think it could stand too much playing around with on set, as it were, because you couldn't. It's almost as if it's too rigidly plotted for that to be allowed to happen.
So should we mention? Should we get into the big twist?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so
because as twists go, this is pretty bloody wild, isn't it?
You will never see this coming. This is by far one of the best twists I've ever seen in a show, in a movie. This is a fantastic twist. To me, it's on par with the Chinatown twist of she's my daughter, she's my sister, because you just don't see that coming at all. And it also has a huge impact on the story and the character. And the problem that I have with a lot of current golden agey kind of stuff, your Proro movies or your, whatever individuals who are writing their golden age crime stuff, is the twists are just there to facilitate the catching of the criminal. They don't ever have major impact on the protagonist, on the detective. Whereas the twist of this is a major thing to do with the character. Now, there's things throughout throughout the early episodes that you realize are a little bit funny. There's one bit where he says, he metabolizes alcohol at an incredibly fast rate, so he can't get drunk. Which the show was just sort of, it was ridiculous, but the show was so cool and suave that I was like, I'll take it. I'm not going to question it.
My reaction to that was, I quite like that because it's subverting a cliche. I talk about this a lot, really, but the private eye is always swigging whiskey,
Yes.
And even somebody like Morse is always drinking something.
Yes,
and
Morse is an alcoholic.
Morse is an alcoholic. Yeah, he says he's a dipsomaniac. Always wants one, never needs one. Anyway. But the reality is that if Philip Marlowe drank as much as he does in, say, Farewell, My Lovely, when he first meets Mrs. Grail, then he'd be on his knees.
Yes. Yeah.
Any normal man would. Yes. So I quite like the fact that they got a private eye. One of the cliches of which is always having a stiff whiskey, but who is still capable. And I even looked it up, and there is a condition where you can process alcohol quicker than normal.
Is it? Okay. All right. Cool.
So, I'm not sure. I'm sure that even at the time I thought there's a bit of poetic license being taken here because I bet you can't do it that quickly. But there are people who can do it, and who then don't get drunk. And I thought that's a nice little cliche.
Yeah.
But being subverted. But when the twist comes, you realise that's it's something else entirely.
So there's that happen. That's that kind of like get your antenna up. And so I've watched Sugar twice all the way through. And on second viewing, it's just as good. It's just as gripping. And you start seeing all the clues that they're leaving for what this reveal is going to be. But one of the other things, like on my first watch, I was like, man, there's one particular episode where he just gets the living crap beat out of him. And he has some earlier scuffles where he's cut and injured, and he sort of does the tough guy thing of healing himself and doesn't go to the doctor for some reason, doesn't want to go to, says, I can't go to the hospital and stuff like that. So you're kind of like wondering why. But there's a particular fight in this cabin with 3 other people where something happens where someone points a gun at him, and he's like, he moves at the speed of light, and you're like, whoa, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
But then after that, you just sort of think he just moved fast. It's just like, you think it's just editing. And then he gets stabbed in the gut, and you're like, oh my God. And he's like bleeding out, and he's driving home. And I'm like, this guy, like, he's on the cliche side, it's like, yeah, this is very typical hard-boiled detective. He can take these sort of absurd beatings and walk away from it. But then you get to the twist where his buddy comes and stitches him up, and then he kind of recovers a little bit. And there's one way in which he can recover, and there's a hint at it early on when he has his very first appointment with one of the doctors, where he's like, have you taken your medicine? And he's like, no, I haven't done it. He's like, well, you should. And so then he pulls out this kind of interesting, odd crystal syringe, and he sticks in his neck. And then you just sort of see, oh, okay, maybe he's like an addict. Maybe he's addicted to some sort of drug. And then you're watching him, and he's in the bathroom, and he's looking at himself in the mirror. And then everything, his face begins to change. His hair begins to vanish. He begins to morph into a goddamn alien. And like, you say it, and it sounds absurd. But when it happened, I was like, this makes so much sense with what has happened so far and why he is the way he is. That sort of otherness to his character. Like, I loved it.
I'm going to say right now that I stared at the screen open-mouthed and wide-eyed.
Same.
And to the extent I had to rewind it to carry on,
I did too.
And I thought, my gut reaction was, you are joking. And I had the opposite reaction to you. I thought, this is ridiculous.
Okay.
But I'll preface that, or add to that by saying, I'm not the biggest sci-fi fan in the world. So, my sort of sci-fi loves extend to Flash Gordon, Star Wars, and the $6 Million Man.
Right. Right.
But when I thought about, I was ready to throw the remote control through the screen. But what I can appreciate about it is that no matter what you think about it, it invokes in you some sort of reaction. There is nothing bland about it.
Yeah.
And when I calmed down a little bit, I then sort of rationalized, like you. I started to think, well, hang on, no, because this is this is the same sort of feeling as the Golden Age twist, where you should have seen this coming because all the clues were there.
Yeah,
the reaction is the same. It's what I was at a crime writing festival this weekend, and somebody used the phrase about Golden Age solutions: retrospective inevitability. In other words, when you look back at it, there was no other answer that this could have possibly have given you. And that's how I feel about Sugar. So to me, I don't have to like the fact that he's an alien. What I have to like about it is that it was plotted and written so well that I should have seen it coming from episode 1.
Yes. Once
it happens, then you're into it. And then, we might come on to this later, it then does something very clever, I think, in terms of the theme of the whole piece and the message of the whole piece.
There was something that sort of tipped me off a little bit. And I typically watch shows and films at home with subtitles. Sometimes that's because we have a kid and I'm trying to pay attention and yeah. But I had subtitles on, and one of Sugar's issues is he's very hung up because his sister Jen was abducted at some point, and part of his motivation to take this case, and the case that he's working on, is this missing girl named Olivia Siegel. Her granddad is a massive Hollywood producer. Her dad is a big Hollywood director and producer. Her brother is an actor, and so it's this big Hollywood legacy family. And he when he sees the picture of Olivia and begins to dive into her life, he feels a connection because it reminds him of his sister, and so there's this personal motive to want to find her, but also there's a sort of a starstruck motive as well, because he's a big fan of the Siegels and their movies and things like that. I like how all that sort of was tied in, but there was something that I noticed as he was talking about his sister Jen with the subtitles, and when they spelt her name, it was spelled D''Jen. So DeGen. And I was like, that's a funny way to spell it. I just thought like, someone's just trying to be like weird and clever with these names. But then when he became an alien, I was like, that's why they spelt the name that way.
They call her Jen. They don't say
DeGen. Yeah, they just say Jen.
Jen.
The D is silent.
That's a clue that you'd only get if you saw it in writing. But nevertheless, there still are those clues that you could pick up on. I mean, the whole alcohol thing then suddenly made sense.
I was going to say also that whole group that he's a part of also suddenly makes sense because
because I was a bit taken aback when he suddenly became a polyglot, and he could speak all these languages, and you think, well, how educated is this fella?
Yes.
So that's one of the questions that, and again, that's what did I call it? Retrospective inevitability.
Yes.
That's one of the things that stands out to you.
Yeah.
But you don't realize it's a big thundering clue.
Yeah. But you buy it though. You buy it. Because all these people are in this little secret society and they're all just really stinking smart people who can do all you're like, okay, fine. You're making me believe that they're just really smart people and none of them they're not people at all.
Yeah. And another point is that then sort of became more obvious as a clue is that he has a handler. He has a sort of boss.
Yes, Ruby. Her name is Ruby.
Who is constantly complaining that he's getting too close and too emotionally involved.
Yes.
Now, again, you take that as, well, he's a tough PI with a heart.
Yes.
Because that's what you normally get in a lot of these things.
And equating it with his sister, that's what you're thinking. You're like, it's because of his sister.
Yeah. So he's a PI with a heart, which is damaged. Mm. And it turns out to be not that at all. It's that you're not one of them. So you shouldn't try to be like them.
Yes. And also by the road that he was taking to find Olivia ultimately jeopardizes their anonymity. Which then becomes a big part of the second half of the season, where basically whoever has sent them to Earth is like, okay, you've actually now become exposed, and it's down to Sugar trying to find Olivia, and as a result of that, they've all been called home. And so then there's a big sort of race to kind of find Olivia, and there's that wonderful noir twist again, where it's like the people are the ones who have betrayed you. And they all knew where Olivia was this whole time, and no one was telling him. And it's just like, wow.
So it does all the private eye tropes, for want of a better word. But in that he is the loner, he is the one that's on his own. He is the one that's exposing a conspiracy.
Yes.
It's just that it happens to be a conspiracy of alien beings.
Yes.
And I mean, it is bonkers.
Yes.
To me, it is bonkers.
Yes.
But I can appreciate that it's a very engaging way of telling an old story in a new way. It's because it's not actually deviating that far from its core influences and its core origins. It's not too far at all removed from those.
No.
Like you say, it is. I can see the Chinatown reference. in terms of the twist, but also in terms of this man is going to uncover, almost unwittingly, a massive secret and a massive bit of corporate, in inverted commas, conspiracy, and he has to be silenced. He has to be put out of the way, and and he can't be allowed to do it at any cost.
Yes.
Added on to another film noir trope of those closest to you are those that you should fear most.
Yes, and I think
it's got its roots. It's got its feet firmly in the roots of film noir.
Definitely,
it's just that it's a genre split.
It is, and I think what made it work so well is despite the fact that he does turn into an alien for about 3 seconds of one episode, and we never really see it again. We have one more quick flash of an alien planet, and very, very, very quickly.
And his eyes go. He shows Melanie's eyes, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, he just show Melanie's eyes, which is a very sweet moment. But it was the level of restraint that this show had to not go bonkers sci-fi. Like no one is using. There's no like hyper technology. Except for one bizarre little typewriter like thing. Everyone is like using normal human technology. There's nothing, they're not using anything special. It's just that, there's some sort of other being on Earth. And I like that. Now, I mean, I had to wonder if there was some Superman DC inspiration, because one of the creators of Superman is Jerry Siegel, and the family that Sugar is investigating is the Siegel family. Yeah. I'm like, there must be, because it also made me think of Martian Manhunter in the DC universe, who is
very much so.
He's a cop for a while. He's very disguised, and all. I thought this is almost like, but So I wonder if there was some influences with there.
Very much so. But just going back to the point we made earlier about his love of film. Again, like earlier, I said, well, it's nice that. It's a good touch that he's a fan of these films, and he's almost sort of learned how to be a PI because of those films. But when it's revealed he's an alien, it's then very clear that he's learning about humanity. He thinks he's learning about humanity by watching films.
Yes,
and I mean that's a bit of a commentary on who we are today. I suspect that we all make judgments about people based on what we see on a screen.
Yeah,
all the time.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, again, it's a very layered and meaningful, complicated bit of writing. I think.
I think so. I mean, I'd say massive hats off to the creator and writer of the show. There were only two things that I had a problem with, and I'll cover them quickly because I know we need to move on to Rebus. One was that in the course of the show, Sugar has a friend named Henry Thorpe, played by Jason Butler Warner. It later comes out that Thorpe is behind some really nasty stuff, behind some stuff that was connected to Olivia. He basically becomes the ultimate betrayer of Sugar. I found that to be it came out of the blue a little too much.
Yeah,
I didn't quite like it. And in addition to that, there was someone that Thorpe was working with, this senator's son, and because of this connection was the reason that Sugar and his people were being forced to leave the planet, basically. I felt the introduction of this last plot with the senator's son being this sort of torturous guy in the vein of the girl with the dragon tattoo, sort of basement dwelling guy who tortures people for fun. I felt those two elements, they made sense a little bit, but they also felt very rushed and tacked on because they don't get there until the very end. It's the only part that I thought, okay, I see it, but eh.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can take Henry more than the Senator's son because I think the idea that because Henry stays behind. Henry's one of the aliens and he stays behind.
Yes.
What I took away from that was that he's going to stay behind to watch the people who do the evil stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Because he's fascinated by that. And so the overall point of it to me was that they've come to learn about humanity. And they've come to study human beings, and it ends with a sort of Holmes and Moriarty thing, in that one is going to study wickedness, one is going to study righteousness if there's a series 2, and I hope there's a series 2 for all my saying that the sci-fi element was bonkers. I hope there is a series 2.
Me too.
That will be a sort of meeting of minds, a sort of battle of the wits, because I don't want anyone to be put off by the alien thing, because it is only a brief moment that you see him in his alien form, but it does come a bit out of nowhere for me, until you realise that it's been perfectly plotted, of course.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily take away from the whole overall feel and scope of the show, and it if anything, it makes him strangely more, a bit like the Terminator and Terminator 2. It makes him more human. So I hope there's a series 2. I genuinely do.
I do too. It's set up. It's set up for a series 2. There's the big mystery of where is his sister. Thorpe is connected to his sister's disappearance. So I think there could I could see there being seasons of this show, and the big thing being where is Jen, and the finale of the series being finding Jen, alive or dead. I can see that. Fantastic show. I loved it. Falcons. How many Falcons would you give it?
4.
I'll give it a 4.5. Next, another
no aliens. There are no aliens in Edinburgh.
There are no aliens in Edinburgh. Next, we're moving to Edinburgh to some tartan noir. So the character John Rebus is a character created by Ian Rankin, who was just on our show talking about Chinatown. Rebus is a very fun character. He's steeped in tartan, what they call tartan noir. The thing that I love about Scottish crime fiction is Scottish crime fiction, more than English crime fiction, is way more influenced by hard-boiled film noir stuff. It's always more tough and more gritty.
I always say that I've been a fan of Rebus for almost since the first book came out. Not quite, but almost since. And I always say, although he is a police detective, he starts off as a DS, as he is in the TV show, and then he becomes a DI. And then now in the books he's retired. Even when he's a DI, they're told pretty much from his point of view, albeit in the third person. And certainly in the early to mid books, he is essentially a detective on his own. He is, to all intents and purposes, he is a noir private eye.
Absolutely.
He's not part of a team. Even though he carries the rank and a warrant card. And they could be at a push. They could be first person narration.
Oh, absolutely. They really could.
They have much more in common. I don't think Ian will mind me saying this. Much more in common with the likes of Chandler and Hammett than they have with Christie and Sayers. And
absolutely.
So you're absolutely right. Much more heavily influenced by American crime writing.
Yes. So Rebus has had we'll briefly cover this. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Rebus had a sort of complicated history on television. There in 2000, there was a show called Rebus, starring John Hannah. Hannah, who is a good actor, didn't really want to do the role. He sort of felt pushed into it. He had a different choice in mind. He was an executive producer. He had someone else in mind, but that person was the studio were like, nah. And so then he sort of took over the role, but he was younger, didn't really fit the role kind of aesthetically and all that sort of stuff.
It was hot on the heels of Four Weddings and a Funeral, where he'd made a bit of a smash.
Yes.
So the Americans, or certainly over here, they wanted him to be the star because he was on the rise.
Yes.
Then he did one part or not.
Yeah, well, they did one season with him, and then they did 2 more seasons with Ken Stott as Rebus, which was he's older, he's more, I don't know, he's chubby and thick and all that kind of stuff, and so he kind of fits an older Rebus, I guess. And both of those 3 seasons are just sort of okay. I never loved them. They were just sort of okay.
They were okay at the time because we had nothing else, really. But Rebus, for me, in terms of dramatization, was always Ron Donachie on the radio. That was the best version for me at the time. But in terms of TV, the Ken Stott, he was a better choice, but he is just, he's too obviously Ken Stott. And the scripts were an hour. The programs were an hour and a half on commercial TV, so really they were an hour and 10, perhaps.
Yes.
So there was never any depth to them. They were very simple stories. They took the names of some of Ian Rankin's books, but didn't do the plots. They were just a bit of a mishmash, really.
Yes. Yeah. So the show was eventually canceled in 2008. And then, but there was rumors that they might do some specials. They never did them. But then in 2012, Ian bought the rights back to the TV series. And I think famously, Ian never watched the original shows. He didn't want to.
He didn't want to do what he calls a Colin Dexter. Colin Dexter was creator of Inspector Morse, and if you read the Morse books in order, you can see when the John Thor TV series takes off, because Colin Dexter starts to change the character of Morse. You know, Morse doesn't drive a Jaguar in the original books. Lewis is a middle-aged Welshman in the original books.
Yeah.
Until the time when, without warning, Morse has got a maroon Jaguar and Lewis is a young Geordie. So you can see when suddenly Morse has got white hair instead of having dark grey hair and all the rest of it. You know,
right.
So
yes,
Dexter definitely, pardon the pun, thawed the character of Morse, and Ian's very open about saying, I didn't want to, Rebus was mine. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want anyone else's influence, or anyone else's voice in my head when I'm writing that character. And all credit to him.
I think that's a smart move. I think it's complicated, and like sometimes you can do it. Like I know that Ian Fleming was very much against Sean Connery, but then loved Sean Connery, and then began to pepper in Scottish elements to James Bond, which I think it can work, but I can also see it can also sometimes not work as well. But I would almost be, I think maybe Colin Dexter being inspired by the show might be for the benefit.
Oh, it definitely is.
Of Morse?
It definitely is. I don't want
that first book is hard to read.
I don't want to be a Morse batterer, but the Morse of the TV series and Endeavour TV series
fantastic
is much more palatable than the Morse of the books.
So anyway, it was announced that they were going to do a new Rebus show, and it was a Swedish company, a Swedish streaming service called Viaplay, who were behind the filming of the show. But then they left they did this in 2022. They then left the UK, so the show was in the bag, done, and they weren't going to air it. I was like, crap, what's going to happen now? Yeah. Then the BBC swooped in smartly. Like I was surprised that the BBC wasn't behind the show in the first place. But so the BBC swooped in and bought the show and released it. I gotta say, there's a lot to love about this show. I think Richard Rankin, who's not related to Ian, is absolutely fantastic. But actually, we had a brief chat with Ian about the show, and we might as well just play that for you now. So let's do that. Here's Ian talking about Rebus.
The Rebus's reincarnation on television was a fairly tortuous process. It took a long time for us to get it made. And it was made by a Swedish streaming company who then decided to walk away from English language drama. So in some ways it could have fallen by the wayside very easily, but we had a producer who believed in it. And we had it in the can, and we knew it was great stuff. So we were so delighted when the BBC stepped in and said, we will show this. I think the screenwriter Gregory Burke has done an extraordinary job. He decided early on he wanted a younger, more vigorous Rebus, not the old doddery guy that I write about these days. But he also wanted to write them in this present day, because he wanted to write about present day issues, political issues, social issues, the kind of troubles that families are going through, trying to put bread on the table. And so we went for it. And Gregory also picked up on something that I had let lapse too easily in the books, which is Rebus's relationship with his brother. Having read the early books, which is where most of the plot lines come from in this reinvention, Greg said, look, the brother was a great character. Why did you drop him? You just dropped him after about 3 books. And so he's jacked that up. And the performances, I think, are phenomenal. It's very Scottish, very Edinburgh. If you're south of the border, get your subtitles on, it'll be fine. It's dark, it's sweary. It's the Rebus from the early books, and it's his relationship with his ex-wife and his daughter, and everything is there very strongly. But then characters from the later books come in. So it can be slightly confusing for the first maybe 5 or 10 minutes for Rebus fans, diehard fans, to go, well, hang on a minute, this plot's from an early book, but she's from a later book, and just sit back and enjoy it. And I think Richard Rankin, no relation, Richard Rankin's central performance is charismatic. I can't take my eyes off the guy. I am watching it in real time, so I've only seen 3 episodes so far.
Oh,
so no spoilers. No spoilers, guys.
Okay, no, won't spoil it all. But no, we binged it on iPlayer. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a wonderful adaptation. I think bravo to everyone involved and congratulations, because it's genuinely really good. And I, as everyone knows on Twitter, I'm a harsh as heck critic.
Yeah. And it is dark. It is very dark, and I like that.
I raced through it as well on iPlayer, and it is fabulous. And it is like the early books. I agree. It captures the essence, and I quite like the fact they've not done a particular novel. They've taken bits from, so it becomes its own organic story. I think that works really well, and the casting is fabulous.
Gregory Burke, the screenwriter on it, who also was basically show running it, he's got a story arc. He knows what season 2 should be. So I'm just hoping now that the viewing figures are good enough, strong enough, that the BBC put their hands in their pockets and say, "Okay, guys, on you go. Tell us the rest of the story."
Well, I'll go watch it again. I'll go watch it again just to boost those figures.
Yeah, absolutely. Playing an iPlayer all the time. Continue with playing an iPlayer in the background.
Just leave it playing in the background.
Yeah,
exactly. What are your thoughts on Rebus?
I loved this. I think it was a genuine effort to bring the Rebus of the books, certainly the Rebus of the early books, to the screen, in the same way that the old Jeremy Brett series was a genuine effort to bring Conan Doyle's Holmes to the screen.
Yeah,
I very much put this in the same camp. I think I'm right in saying that. If Ian's listening, I'm sorry if I've got this wrong, but I think he'd said there'll only be another TV series if it's done along the lines of like Scandi Noir, those multiple episodes telling one story. So that it reflects the complexities of the books, because the books, from about midpoint on, the books tend to have 2 or 3 plots going on at the same time. So they are complex books. When, as I said before, the Ken starts for 1 hour and 10 minutes. Not good enough, not long enough. I think it was a smart move to put Rebus back in his DS days.
Yes.
So that if it's a success, which I'm sure it will be, there's time for him to progress.
Yeah.
You can see him turn into the Rebus of the later books.
Yeah,
that's for my money. That's one of the reasons why Endeavour works so well. Seeing the progression of him into the Morse that everyone remembered with John Thor, and I think this will do the same for Rebus. I also think it's right to set it in the modern day. Rebus at this age really would have been in the sort of mid-80s, but I think it'd be very difficult to recreate the mid-80s convincingly, and I don't think it necessarily would have done it any favors. Yeah,
they could have done it in the 80s if they really wanted it. It could have been done, but I am in favor from time to time of there are certain characters who I think kind of in some ways can apply to any day and age. And I mean, this is, you can use comic book examples like Batman. That always applies. It's a complicated subject which we won't go into detail on right now, but the first season of Sherlock I thought was fantastic. That was it was a very good modernization of bringing that character to the 21st century. So I think with Rebus, I think that was a smart idea. It's,
so do I. I think it was right.
Yeah, he's still Rebus. They're still doing a lot of stuff that's in the books. It's just that instead of, there's a couple of things that we lose because of the modernization. So I was talking about that. Rebus is a big music guy, and he's big into like the Rolling Stones and rock and roll like that. And as a result of them modernizing Rebus, there is a line in the show where they're like, Siobhan is asking him, "Oh, what are you into? What do you like? Movies, music, whatever?" He's like, basically, he was like, "I'm not into anything," which it's one of my criticisms. I have a few criticisms on a show that I think on a whole is very, very good. I thought it was a little bit silly to make him that sort of empty culturally, because I think give him the music interest, because you don't have to be, I love punk rock from the 70s and 80s and 90s. I wasn't, I'm not from that generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. I think it was a mistake. I'm glad they didn't sort of make him a fan of modern rock music, if that's the right phrase.
They could have
I
done.
don't think that would be Rebus.
They could have done Jack White. Jack
They
White
could have done. They
would have
could
been
have
a
done. I'm not
perfect,
sure it would have been.
Arctic Monkeys.
They could have done. Yeah, there's loads of bands they could have done, but I think if he's going to be a music fan, he should be the music fan of the bands in the books. And you're right. I mean, a lot of the music I like, including classical, is not my generation.
Yeah,
I'm not that old. You know what I mean? So I think he could have been a young lad who discovered the Stones in his dad's record collection, and
yes,
I think they could have referenced it, even if it were just, if they didn't have time to do it in detail, just posters on the wall or album covers scattered around the floor, something.
Well, the show Bosch does it really well. Bosch leans into his love of jazz, and the artists that Bosch is into, some of them aren't from his era. Some of them are, some of them aren't, though. So it's like you can just love the genre. Like I think I would have kept it. I would. It's a small nitpick, guys. It's a small nitpick.
It is a small nitpick, but
would have kept it.
It's a bit like having Sherlock Holmes not play the violin.
Yes.
It's such a well-known trait of Rebus's character.
Yeah.
That I think it's a shame it wasn't in. I think that's how I'm going to pitch it. I think it's a shame more than anything else.
Yeah.
Maybe if there's a series 2, which I hope there is, maybe they'll do something more with it. But they did so much else that is right and was successful. One of the things that I really liked about this was that it wasn't a straight adaptation of one of the books.
Yes.
What it does is take aspects and elements of a lot of different books.
Mm-hmm.
Some from the early books, some from the later books. The whole idea of Rebus's mentor being washed up and drunk and ill, and Rebus has an affair with the wife. All that comes from a book called Saints of the Shadow Bible, I think it is. So, and that's one of the later books. But the whole thing about the brother relationship, the Rebus brothers relationship, is from the earliest of the books. So this taking of elements and touches and plot ideas and weaving them into something new gives the whole thing a real fresh air. It's the Rebus you recognise. It's certainly Rebus I recognise as a younger man. All the characters whose names who are presented very well on screen, but it's not got that feeling of that you often have with dramatizations where they don't quite do it the way you thought it was when you read it. So then you think, oh, they've missed that bit out, they've missed this bit out, they've changed this character, whatever, because it's a whole new story.
And they sort of approached it in the way that you a lot of like comic book movies approach themselves, and that is, you think about like X-Men, the original X-Men movies, or the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. They're not adapting a comic book narrative, they're adapting elements, and I appreciated that so much more, because it's a character. Again, a BBC Sherlock sort of did the same thing, where they sort of wove various Conan Doyle stories into their narratives, or even the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes did elements of that as well, and I'm a fan of that. As much as I love films like The Big Sleep, I'm also fine. There's lots of like Raymond Chandler like radio dramas that are just sort of Philip Marlowe radio, that are just sort of random adventures. I don't need to see an adaptation of the thing.
Absolutely. Of the Ian Rankin novels, of the ones that you might want to adapt, I think it'd be really tough to do it and do the book justice by doing it with just elements, plot ideas and plot threads and character relationships from a lot of different aspects of the source material, and giving it a new story. You get the essence of the books without offending anybody, by adapting their favorite book in a way that they don't agree with. But one thing about this, which certainly wasn't evident in the John Hannahs or the Ken Stotts, is the brutality of it and the violence of it. I read one review that was put off entirely by that violence, and I thought, well, you've clearly never sort of read any of the books then, because some of the books are pretty grim in terms of the wickedness of the human soul. And that's what I think makes them so, it's an overused phrase, this, but gritty and realistic.
Yeah.
And this wasn't afraid of, I think Ian said last week, there were some scenes where he had to look away.
Yeah.
He certainly said it in some interviews. And there are bits where you think, oh dear. There's a particularly nasty bit with a blowtorch.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I loved it. I love the fact that this show didn't shy away from the darkness and grittiness.
Yeah,
I remember, I have a book out, people, called Bad Blood. And there are scenes in that book that, are proper gangster torture scenes that are very much in line with this kind of stuff. And I remember when I was having the Viva for my PhD, the external examiners were like, yeah, some of these scenes were pretty brutal.
Well, it's a brutal world, and that's what
it is.
The whole theme of the books to me has always been that Edinburgh is the Jekyll and Hyde city, and it literally is the city of Jekyll and Hyde, where it's this openly respectable tourist haven, but underneath it's full of, in the old days, pestilence and plague and violence and crime.
Yeah,
and and Deacon Brodie is the sort of personification of it all.
Yes,
and that's what comes through so well in the books, and I think they captured that in this as well.
Oh, the Edinburgh, the way they yes, I loved Edinburgh in this far more than like in the older shows. There was just a darkness, a grittiness. I recognize a lot of the places. I've been to a lot of the places where they filmed, not during, but before, so, and it just felt very, it felt very real.
One scene is Rebus driving down Princes Street away from the Scott Monument. And the next time you see the car is pulling into a pretty run-down council estate to see his brother.
Yes.
And that's what the books do. The books go from the tourist haven to what
the
Rebus
beauties of Newtown to the ugly nastiness of council estates. The
tourist trap to what Rebus calls in one of the books, the crime scene waiting to happen.
And it is nuts. The kind of the my book, I got to mention again, my book Bad Blood is set in Edinburgh, but set in the 1920s. And that was something I loved playing with, was that difference of what's it like for the rich and where they live versus what it's like where the other people have to live. And, having been to Edinburgh, like I remember one of my very first trips to Edinburgh, like we were going to walk up Arthur's Seat, and we were walking to Arthur's Seat, and we kind of walk out of the city, and you're sort of walking past the Scottish Parliament, and then you're sort of walking through these like really super dodge council-y houses, not anywhere near as bad as those in the show, but even that you're like, man, I'm not that, like, this is a very stark, this is already like, it's nuts.
The sort of rich and poor, at one time literally are living on top of each other, because they just built streets on top of the poor, which is why you've got all those underground streets that you can go and sit, Mary King's Close and all that. They're just underground streets they just built on top of them.
I think for me, this is we're spoiled in 2024 with Sugar and with Rebus. I think it's been a long time since I've watched something noir on television that has just been so refreshing and so well done. And I love the character work. I love, something for Rebus that you feel throughout the whole show is he's divorced, and he has to keep going to his ex-wife's house where she's married to this rich guy, and he has to pick up his daughter, and he lives in this crummy little apartment, and you feel that sort of tension of him wanting to be back with his family, wanting that family back, wanting to be better than this. And there's a scene where he just gets absolutely hammered because he just gets lost in drink because he's so just sad about the current state of his life.
And this is the point I was making before about I'm excited to see the progression from that, which is definitely how he's presented in this first series, to the man who knows that there's no hope of that ever happening.
Yes.
And who is then finds solace in drink, which is what happens. That is the character. And there was a great scene where he's essentially not drinking throughout the first half of the series.
Yeah.
and there's a scene where he goes to the Oxford bar, and I think I'm right in saying he's actually filmed in the Oxford bar, which is more than the Ken Stott series. And he just whiskey after whiskey after whiskey. Great performance, because you can see him getting drunker and drunker and drunker and drunker, until in the end he is sort of bleary-eyed and his hair's a mess, and he's stumbling back down the street to where his flat is.
Yeah.
And it's going to be that progression of the character from maybe I can win Rona back to no, I'm not. And then it sort of tails off. One thing I did like about it was the end, the open ending, which tied up just enough for me, and left you hanging on others.
I have mild issues with the ending. A couple of my criticisms. There's my other two criticisms that I have of.
I think we're going to agree on one.
Yes, my other two criticisms.
Shall I say what my other point was?
Yes,
which is one of my, along with the music, one of my regrets is Siobhan.
Definitely Siobhan.
Siobhan played near enough to do.
Yeah, no, she didn't. Played by Lucy Shorthouse, wonderful actor. She's
great
fantastic. Actress. She's gorgeous.
She'll be a good Siobhan if she's given enough time to shine.
Yes, I was disappointed that she didn't have more to do. I wanted more of her, and I feel like there's a part of me. It's like I understand why they put her in this season, but I felt like there was so much going on with Rebus and his brother and his wife and all that kind of stuff that I thought you really don't need her yet, because she's not able to contribute lots to the narrative. Hold her off for season 2.
Yeah.
Hold her off for season 2. So that's definitely one of my again small gripes. These are very small gripes.
Yeah, these small gripes. I had a similar feeling with Malcolm Fox. I don't think
he didn't need to be there.
If you didn't know the books, I think you'd wonder who he was.
You would.
Whereas in the books, there is a definite tension between him and Rebus. So, and I think you'd wonder what he was doing there.
Yes.
So I certainly would have suggested holding him till series 2 as well. I think.
And I mean, I get they're setting them up. It's all set up so that season 2, like, you can finally do stuff with them, and maybe that was the aim. But it just felt like I wanted more of them in this one because they're there. So that's definitely my other issue is sort of with the ending. There's Rona's husband, Lockie, opens the door, doorbell rings, opens the door, and he gets shot. And you don't know if it's Rebus's brother who has shot him, and you don't know if it is one of these other gangsters who has shot him. My problem with that was I didn't, kind of with this other stuff, there wasn't enough of this character, Lockie. I felt like killing him off at the end of season 1 was a bit of a rush, and that should have been a season 2 thing, because Rona hasn't had any chance to understand that she was married to a crook. Rebus is this washed up alcoholic policeman, but and she doesn't, they're divorced, but she's living in this mansion, but this mansion is built on dirty money. And maybe that will come out in season 2.
Well,
but
I think that may well be the plot of season 2, might it?
But the problem that I think I had with it is because his character was so thinly used, the impact of his death was a little bit, it didn't hit as hard as what it could have done. Yeah. But also because the character is in the show so little, I'm not going to lie, even though I binged the show, there was a scene between Lockie and one of the gangsters in his office. I didn't make the connection that was Rona's husband. So I was like, oh wait, that was, right. And so therefore, for me, that told me that, for at least for me, that character didn't impact enough.
That's interesting. I didn't have that. I can't lie either. I didn't have that. I knew it was him.
Yeah, my wife had the same problem. She was like, "Who is that?" And I was like, right. "I don't know." And then we realized, right,
because my wife didn't.
We both were like,
look at the draw.
On that one.
Look at the draw. But so for me, the question was, well, is this Michael or is this Daryl Christie?
Yeah,
And that to me was quite a nice little cliffhanger to end it on the understanding that will be the primary murder investigation in series 2.
Yeah.
But sometimes, sometimes the books are open ended. You know, they certainly the last one is. Like,
Yeah.
I can't wait for the next one to see how he resolves it. But anyway, sometimes they are left, you know, with open question, and you're left to decide yourself, which is always a good thing. And I felt it did this again, a bit like the alien thing in Sugar. When I first watched it, I thought it's going to go off. Is it? This is good. The credits going to roll now, and they've not explained very much at all. When I sort of sat back and thought about it, I thought, well, that's okay, then, isn't it? That's okay because that's saying something about the world, really. We do know enough. You know, we know enough of the story that was told. We know enough of the solution to it. You know, it's not just run out of time. I certainly didn't get that idea.
Yeah, no, it definitely resolves itself enough to feel that you've had your solutions. But yeah, you know, I was perfectly fine with that. And another thing that I really loved about this movie was the way it was bookended. And it begins with Rebus in an ambulance trying to suffocate his arch enemy, Cafferty. At the end of the show, he is trying to save his life.
You saved him.
You know, and I like that. I like that juxtaposition. It showed character growth. It showed it was interesting and fun. So I like the way the show sort of played with that. I like the relationships that were being built and
absolutely. I also like the way they captured Rebus's character trait. You know, very often he's seen as, it won't take much for him to go dirty. And that's certainly something that Malcolm Fox has always thought, you know, just how dirty is Rebus, he says in one of them. And the answer is he isn't, sort of thing, but he perhaps does things his own way sometimes. Yeah. And there's the scene in the warehouse where Michael and his gang are with Rebus and they've got Cafe. You know, and he says, well, come on, I'll do it then. And he gets the gun out. And that I really had a sense that something might go badly wrong there, you know, and that was the Rebus of the books to me, you know.
Yeah.
Got an idea, has to appear to be willing to do the dirty.
Yes.
But doesn't really want to, and he's hoping that this gamble will pay off. That was perfectly captured for me. That was like Rebus stepping out of the pages onto the screen for me. And there were touches like that all the way through, which I thought Robert Rankin, like as you say, no relation.
Richard Rankin
captures the spirit really. Richard Rankin, sorry, captures the spirit really, really well and really nuanced performance.
I liked him a lot in this role. I liked him a lot. I thought in general everyone was really, really well cast. I mean the emotion with stuff like between Rebus and Maggie, the girl he's having an affair with. You know, when you know he's sitting there with his buddy and he's like, oh, she's, you know, I think his name's Gary, isn't it? Oh, you know, she's having an affair. And I want you to find the guy and you know, tell her, you know, to treat her right. And he's like, oh, she's not having an affair. And then like that next scene, and you're like, oh man, it's you. And damn, you know, you really get that sense of his sort of moral ambiguities.
You do. And also the sense that he's not always happy with himself because of them.
One other thing that I really liked about the show is that they didn't dial back the Scots.
Yeah.
It's very heavily dialected. Is that the right word? There's very heavy Scottish dialect in this show, and even if you like watch it with subtitles, it's like it's written in the Scottish dialect, which I loved. And I you know, I got it because my book is set in Scotland. That's why it's all coming to me. There was one of like editors and with book editors, they're always like, you need to dial it back. People are gonna get annoyed. They don't like reading in this dialect, which I think is bullshit. I think readers do like it. I think editors need to chill the f out.
Rebus the character's from Fife, and you know grew up in Fife, and as did Ian, and he lives in Edinburgh. He's going to talk the way that he talks.
Yeah. And like when you think about the John Hannah and the Ken Stott one, you know, they're just like Scottish guys. Whereas this feels like, and I think that's part of the reason this feels so like authentically Edinburgh, is they're not giving you like Queen's English version of Scottish.
No, I was just going to say, Ken Stott and John Hannah are Scottish blokes, of course. But they're also trained actors, and they talk like trained actors.
Yes.
Whereas, and obviously, Rankin's a trained actor. I'm not saying that, but he's put in. I don't know if he's laying on his accent, but he's certainly not talking like a man who's been to RADA or Lambda or any of those theatre schools. He's talking like a bloke who lives and works in Edinburgh.
Yeah. Yes.
And there is such a thing as talking down to your audience. And
there is.
And this doesn't do it.
It also made it really fun when him and Siobhan are having some of their fun moments where he's like, "Oh, so what? You came here to study?" Because she's English. They're like, "Well, you came here to study, and you just stayed here because just that kind of poking at that sort of that sort of stuff," which I loved. I was like, "That's great." Loved
it is great stuff. That and he has that great line where they're walking up the steps, and she's absolutely worn out. Yeah. And he said, "The city of John Knox, Shiv, you meant to work hard."
Yes, yeah, I love that. I also love the bit when he goes to pick up Siobhan, and he's talking to a roommate, and there's this bike, and they're like, "It's our shared bike." I just love how just ridiculous he finds that whole that whole concept of a shared bike.
Yeah, absolutely. Because not quite liking the tourists and making fun of the tourists and all that.
Yeah. I loved it. It's a fantastic show. I mean, I have, like I said, I have some gripes, but these gripes, again, Ian, if you're listening, these are minuscule. We'll go to Falcons. How many Falcons would you give it?
I'm giving it a 5, I'm afraid. I'm not afraid at all. I'm absolutely. I don't know why I said that. I'm absolutely proud and
that's very English of you, sir.
It was
I'm
very
afraid
English
to tell you that I love this.
It was very English. That's the most English I've been for a long time. I'm giving it a 5. I'm giving it an absolute, fully deserved 5 Falcons.
I'm giving
five,
it
5 Sporrans for this particular.
There we go. I'm giving it 5.8 Falcons. And that's
5.8.
Yeah. Sorry. No, 4.8. 4.8. Sorry.
If we can go over 5, I'll give it a 10.
I give it 20.
4.8.
No, it's 4.8 for me. It's wonderful. It's well written. It's well acted. It's well shot. Feels authentic. It's gritty as shit. It's immersive, so immersive. Love it. There's just a couple of those character things, and I'm like, I wanted more. They should have been more, or someone should have been held back for season 2.
But those are things which are. I mean, Ian told us last week that the writer's got his own view of where this is going to go in series 2 if they get one. Which, if anyone from the BBC is listening, God, give this a second series.
I mean, seriously.
But I think all the gripes that I've got, music, underusing Siobhan, underusing Malcolm Fox, could all be remedied in series 2.
They absolutely can. Yeah, I think anyone watching this show, if you're new to Rebus or a longtime Rebus fan, there's just so much to love about this.
There is, and if you watched it and didn't and liked it, but have never read one of the books, go and find those straight away. They are superb.
I couldn't agree more. One of my favorite is Flesh Market Close.
My favorite is if we're going to do favorites, my favorite is, and has been since I very first read it, Black and Blue.
Definitely go pick up Ian's books. Go watch Rebus.
Yeah.
And again, thanks to Ian for joining us last week for Chinatown, and thanks for giving us a brief little chat on Rebus.
Thanks for the insight into the Rebus series for this episode as well.
Well, that wraps up our investigation. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please do like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.